Hey everybody, Paul Turner here from thediscipleproject.net and paulturnerspeaks.com. And here we are in video number 4, talking about our book club we're working through, Growing With by Kara Powell and Steve Argue. And this particular episode is going to be very, very good because I'm going to teach you how to fight for your kids, not with them. But before we get to that, just a reminder that if you're a parent, listen, I am for you. I have 3 grown adult children. And they are all over the spectrum, emotionally, spiritually, maturity, all those kind of things. I totally feel where you're at. If you're struggling, I'm with you. So feel free, please, to leave some questions down in the comments below, and maybe we can work on this together. Because maybe as I answer your questions, maybe I'm answering my own questions. So if you're a youth worker, by the way, stay with this, because I think you have to know how to fight for your kids as well. Even though maybe you don't have any personal kids of your own, or they're really young, you might need this information later on, or you simply might need this information for those kids in your youth ministry that you just need to fight for in a spiritual sense, in a spiritual way, to keep them around or to keep them within the connection of the church and those things too. So don't tune out just because I'm talking about fighting for your kids. I think you have to fight for your youth group kids as well. So to kick this off, let me just start by a little story that they give in the book that I think is just so, I don't know, it's a great example of what we're trying to do. And I can remember this because I would take my kids and we'd go swimming. And, of course, when they're small, you put the little things on them, the floaties and all the things with them, and they're trying things out. And of course, they want to go out into the deep end, right? All the time. And you're like, okay, well, as long as you got floaties and I'm kind of with you, well, that's going to be perfectly fine. It's when they start getting kind of good at swimming that they want to go further and further away from the wall. And you're like, okay, that's far enough, and it's not, come back. You might want to come back a little bit, and then you're like in the pool and you're running after them. And the book gives a great illustration of kids need a wall both to grab onto and to kick off from. And as a parent, the kicking off is the hurt part, right? They want to kick against us. They want to kick off from us and forge their own identity. And that's just part of growing up. It doesn't make it easy for me as a dad to feel that, but that is the course of action that adolescents will take. They'll kick off, but in kicking off and trying to, they're determining a little bit how far to the deep end they're going to get before they say, you know what, I'm tired, the water's maybe a little deeper than I thought it was going to be, and they need a wall to come back to. And I just thought that was such a great example of what it really means to be a parent, because you're watching them, they're getting further and further away from you, you hope they don't go too far, but they need that wall to come back to, because they need to rest. They need to say, okay, I didn't make it that time, but I'm going to keep trying, and I'm going to get better, I'm going to get stronger. Knowing this now, that kids need us. They need us for resting, and they need us as a launch pad to some degree to kind of launch out a little bit further each time they go. Knowing this can be a struggle, because sometimes we fight with our kids because we think they're going too far, we think they're not going far enough, whatever it may be. I think this quote from the book amply explains the difference between fighting with and fighting for your kids. And it says, when you fight with someone, you want to win. When you fight for someone, you want them to win. When you fight with people, walls are built up. And when you fight for people, walls are torn down. What a great example that is of the difference between fighting for and fighting with. Now, I know as a parent, fear comes into that, right? Once again, in the previous episode, there's a link up here if you want to go watch that. There's that fine balance we talk about, challenging and cuddling them to keep them safe from the deep water out there, those things, right? But I think if you're fighting for your kids, then the conversation is framed in that. It's not framed in, I want to keep you from doing anything. I want to, I'm doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to kind of prove my parental authority, or anything like that. What the framing of the whole discussion you want to have is, listen, I'm fighting for you. I want you to succeed. I want you to do well. Let's talk about how we can do that, right? Let's kind of see how we can do this and work together. Because we know the kinds of things, especially when like young adults come home, that can be a struggle, because we talk about things like, hey, when are you getting that new job? Or maybe they're already home and they're living in your basement or your attic or a spare room or whatever it may be, and those kinds of discussions come up, like, when are you how's the job search going? Hey, how's it going with that new girl? So are you thinking about going back to school, right? All those conversations can quickly turn into fighting with than fighting for. So I think coming up with some new ways to reframe these questions, which I think the book does an ample job of that. It goes into more of the withing process about how not to fight over these things, but rather to fight for. And it gives some great examples in the book. Let me give you 4 quick things that I just jotted down that I think are super important, that if you're going to fight for your kids, I think these need to be a part of not only with what's in the book, but also what needs to be in our hearts. And the first thing is this: I think you have to fight for your kids in prayer. I think you have to fight for them and call them by name and present them before the Lord and say, Lord, this child is yours. Maybe you've dedicated your child as I have. And the day that I dedicated my child, that has to be a real deal for me, right? If I dedicated my child to the Lord, then he is the Lord's. And ultimately, I have to be able to release my child to God, even if they are not living the best way, even if they are making terrible decisions that I don't like. I'm going to fight for them, do my best not to fight with them. But in the end, I'm going to have to go and bring my kids before the Lord and say, Lord, they are yours. The second thing I think that we have to do to be able to fight for our kids is to fight for your kids, remembering our own journey. In our own journey, we have to remember that we weren't always the best. We have to remember the journey that we had with our parents. We have to remember the journey of how difficult it was, how unsure we were, how confused we were at times, and even angry. And we have to remember our own journey, because if we don't, we're going to have this kind of superior attitude, like we've attained or figured it out or any of those things, and that's not what our kids need to hear. What our kids need to hear is, if you back from the other video, is that, listen, can I tell you a story about a time, and say, look, I've been where you're at, and it was difficult for me, and I understand that it's difficult for you. Using that empathy in your relationship to be able to to be able to avoid the fight in that case, and just being empathetic. The third thing is this: I think you have to fight for your kids by holding on to God's promises. And I beat this like a drum with other parents and with the parents that I've pastored before. And I just tell them, look, I know you're clinging to Proverbs 22:6, right? Train up a child in the way they should go. When they are old, they will not depart from it. And the key about that is when they are old, right? Our kids' brains are not even developed until they are 26, 27 years old. By the time they get that wisdom, before they get all those things, old may be 30, old may be 35, old may be 40, before they realize the things that you've taught them are wisdom. And they're going, oh, okay. Now, hopefully that's sooner rather than later. But I think we have to rely upon God's promises to say, look, the promises that I'm counting on is not just Proverbs 22:6. I'm counting on the promises that God loves my kids. Jesus died for my kids. Jesus rose from the dead for my kids. Jesus conquered hell, death, and the grave for my kids. And I think that's so critical, so important that we remember the gospel in all of these things as it relates to our kids. And remember that Proverbs 22:6 is not the only promise that we can depend upon. There's plenty of other promises for strength for you as a parent, but also for your kids as well. And the fourth and final fighting for your kid is to fight with grace, not judgment. When we fight for our kids, I think the key for me is, and I've not always done very well at this, is that we have to be grace-filled. We have to remember the grace that we were shown, at times in our lives. If you think back to a moment in your life when grace, abundant grace was shown by your parents for some screw-up or for some terrible thing you did, or maybe that, and you remember that moment, remember those moments. We have to remember those moments when it happens to our kids and say, okay, grace, not judgment. Grace is fighting for, judgment is fighting with. Once again, grace is not permission. Grace is saying, I'm going to love you no matter what. So stick with grace and allow it to permeate your relationship to where you're fighting, you're reminding yourself every time you show grace, you're saying, look, I'm fighting for my kid, not with my kid. So, but that's it, guys. That's it for today. I hope that these have been helpful for you. If you have not bought the book, by the way, there is a link down below that you can get the book for yourself and be able to use it with your family, or if you're a youth pastor, use it with your ministry and the parents in your ministry. If you're brand spanking new to the channel here, thanks for hanging around for a little bit. I appreciate you being a part. Be sure to go ahead and click the subscribe button. I would love you to be a part of the community here, and there'll be some links around my head or towards the end of the video, and you can click on that or the link down below there. And also, if you're a regular, thank you so much for being a part today and being a part of the book club. I hope that you're enjoying it. Be sure to give me your questions, comments, all those kind of good things down in the comments below, and let's chat about it, all right? That's it for today, guys. I'll catch you guys in the next video. We'll talk to you guys later.